I've had a fairly normal life. Nothing exceptionally weird or supernatural has ever happened to me, but I have had a small number of weird experiences that stood out enough that I remember them to this day. I'm not superstitious in any way, I'm open to the idea of ghosts and ghouls and all that crap, but more often than not I can rationalize away the mystery. These stories, though, have me a bit stumped. One of them can easily be explained, but the other two are a bit harder to make sense of. As always, feel free to leave some comments if you have any thoughts on these experiences, or you've had similar ones yourself. I'd love to hear about them. But I don't want to drag this out any longer. Let's get right into it with our first story. So, in my previous house, my bedroom was on the bottom floor. The house was on a hill, so it was a walkout basement leading into the backyard. My bedroom, well, wasn't really a bedroom. It was more the back end of the basement living room with a curtain nailed across the support beam because my previous bedroom was too small and that was the best we could do. This isn't really the point of the story, but that curtain freaked me out. It was actually 3 curtains together because we couldn't find a single one big enough. Every night I would look at it because there was no way in hell I was turning my back on it. Sometimes the curtain would be shifted for some reason or another, and I would just be staring out of this narrow gap into the pitch black darkness of the room beyond. It was a nightmare, but that's not the point of this video. So I had a window in this makeshift bedroom. It was pretty high off the ground, but outside, because we were on a hill, it was right on the ground, surrounded by this weird gravel area that I will do my best to illustrate here because it's a little too hard to explain. The important part is that on the side leading to our backyard was at least a 7-foot tall fence. And on the other side, leading to our front yard, was a weird series of raised cinder block platforms which were also full of gravel. Not easily accessible, and certainly not easy to enter quietly. So unlike the other stories I will tell here, this happened on numerous occasions. I was just lying in bed, trying to get to sleep at around midnight or later, when I hear the distinct sound of footsteps on gravel going past my window. The first time I heard this, my reaction was quite understandably, what the actual fuck is that? There was no way in hell I was going to open my blinds to check, so I just had to lie there and try to get to sleep while some unknown thing trotted around outside my window. The weird thing is I never heard it coming or going. Maybe our walls blocked out more sound than I thought, but I didn't hear anything leap over the fence or come down the other way. Just a short trot past my window, then nothing. This wasn't a nightly occurrence, but it wasn't rare either. Maybe once every week or two, for a couple of months. Our best guess was it was deer, as they are quite common in the area, but to this day, I don't know for certain what it was. This next story occurred much later. Actually, it must have been earlier on this year, maybe late last year. My current circumstances are quite a bit different from my last house. I live on the 2nd floor of a townhouse above the garage, with a big glass door and balcony going out the front end, looking out across a highway onto a new development and forest on the other side. It's also kind of creepy because I'm the only one on this floor. My brother and parents sleep on the floor above me, and I think that what I use as a bedroom, both our neighbors use as a dining room. So I'm completely alone on this level in my block, if not the entire neighborhood. But anyways, this story starts the same, with me in bed at around 1:30 a.m. It was a fairly windy night, I recall. I was just doing my thing, when out of nowhere, this weird, semi-regular, for lack of a better word, tooting sound just starts. It sounded like someone blowing a quick burst of air through a paper towel or toilet paper tube. This noise repeated for probably over an hour, just somewhat rhythmic, maybe a 5-second pause, another pause. Sometimes it would be fairly consistent. Every 5 seconds it would go, but other times there'd be a 10 or 20-second break before it started up again. My initial thought was that because of the wind, some tube or something off to the right of my house was making noise. This kind of made sense because there's construction all over the place at all times, so it wouldn't be unusual for some tubes or pipes to be lying about. But the weird thing was that it seemed to be moving. Like, I was just listening to this tooting coming from somewhere off to the right of my house. It wasn't too loud, but it almost seemed to get louder and softer sporadically. Then, I heard it come from the left. It did this a few times, then back to the right, then a bit later back to the left, like it was moving around the neighborhood. That quickly destroyed my pipe hypothesis. I did try to peek out of my curtains, but didn't see anything. I didn't dare actually go outside, so instead I just laid back down and tried to get back to sleep while some mysterious night duder was wandering around my neighborhood. Because my brain's a dick, it immediately went to the idea that there's some kind of giant cryptid thing wandering around that makes this tooting noise to awaken and annoy people until they go outside to investigate, only for them to be grabbed and eaten. It was fun trying to get to sleep that night. For a long while, I wasn't really sure what to do for my last Halloween video. I was playing around with the idea of weird things I've experienced, though I haven't had that many. But a little less than a week after I posted my first video on YouTube, I had a very strange and disturbing experience that I felt was worth sharing here along with those other two experiences. So this was on September 12th, the night before I started writing this script, so it's still fresh in my mind. This was probably the latest of the three experiences, 3:30 a.m. I had just gone to bed after working on the script for another video. After a long heat wave, it was the first night that it was cool enough to sleep without a fan on. I mentioned earlier that I live near a highway. That means that most of the night I can hear the sounds of cars driving by my house. I know what they sound like, and I know the speed they usually go. There was a break in the cars, as there sometimes is. It was silent for a long while. Then I heard another car on its way, though this one sounded different. Like a car driving on a wet road, except we hadn't had rain in weeks. As it got louder, it sounded more like static. Not only that, it was slow. Way too slow for a car. Usually from when I hear a car approaching to the moment it passes my house, it only takes 10 or 20 seconds. After the same amount of time, whatever this thing was barely sounded any closer. For maybe a solid minute it was still approaching, the static sound growing slowly louder until it was right in front of my house. Then... nothing. It didn't fade out or disappear into the distance. It came to what sounded like right across from me and instantly cut out, like someone switching off a radio. Okay, that was weird, I thought to myself. Then after only a moment of silence, the most bizarre sound I've ever heard started up. Rhythmic and shrieking bursts like a siren, but it was like no siren I'd ever heard, more like the start of an elk call. These shrieks came in 5 or 6 bursts at a time, maybe 1 second apart. Then it would stop for 2 or 3 seconds, then start again. On top of this, the static noise had returned, though much quieter. If that wasn't weird enough, the initial static sound I'd heard approached from the highway off to the right, the more rural direction. It slowly came in from the right, then stopped in front of my house. When the shrieking started, it began to fade away back into the direction it had come from. Not only that, it didn't quite sound like it was coming from the highway. It sounded almost higher, like it was a floor above me or maybe above the roofs. Just like when it arrived, it slowly, very slowly disappeared back into the unknown. Though it grew quieter, I could still hear it for several minutes before I eventually fell asleep shortly after. This stuck with me so much that, for this video, I tried to recreate this sound using the closest equivalents I could think of: static and an elk call. This is the closest approximation of the sound I could make. Yeah, imagine hearing that at 3:30 in the morning when you're the last one awake. Fucking terrifying. I couldn't even look out the window to see what it was because they had these reflective styrofoam panels in the window to keep the heat out. I haven't the slightest idea what the hell that was, and if anyone has any ideas, please share. I'd love to know what you guys think I heard that night. That's pretty much it for my weird night experiences. Though I've got one more mini story I thought I'd share just because it's kind of funny. As previously mentioned, I live across from a new development. It's got houses being built now, but at the time of this story it was just a street and empty lots. On a particularly foggy night, this time probably no later than 11 or so, I look out my window across the street and notice that something isn't quite right. And by that, I mean, my first thought was, were there always trees there? There was a cluster of trees across the way between the new development and me that I had never seen before. My brain was trying to rationalize it, as it always does, but I was also freaking out internally. Trees don't just appear out of nowhere, and they were way too big to have been planted recently. It turned out that I was just an idiot and had failed to realize that the streetlights in the new development were on, which they had never been before. That, coupled with the fog, backlit the trees in a way they never had been, and made me think trees had just appeared out of nowhere. The next day I looked across and realized, yeah, those trees had always been there, I'm just an idiot. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please press all the buttons and follow me in all the places. I hope to see you next time, but until then, good night.